Yeah. All right, let's make everybody yawn.
You're going to make me yawn.
I know, that was the idea.
I don't need to yawn anymore.
That was the exact intention. It's funny how that has that effect.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Huh, small crowd so far. A lot of people had registered though. Guess they all want the recording. Cool. We'll give it another minute or two.
Okay.
Maybe 3. But that's it. I'm stopping at 3. That is it. I wanted to find, I usually am pretty good about saving the links, like in this case to the post that actually inspired today's topic, but I couldn't find it where I would normally have put it. Shame on me. I didn't use my systems properly. Oh, well. It's always alarming when you get those emails that lets you know that your access to somebody's QuickBooks Online company has been removed.
Had that happened before.
Yeah, it's like I mean, most people are pretty good. Like they'll give you the heads up, even if it's like, whether it's friendly or not, sometimes, let's face it, people get mad and they remove your access because they want to move on and hire somebody else. But you figure, I guess, I don't know, common courtesy, being what it is, I would let somebody know, like, hey, by the way, I'm removing your access.
Right.
If I'm mad, I'll just say, I'm sure you understand why. If I'm not mad, I'll be like, then I'll explain why. Like, I just don't need you to help me with this company right now, and I need the space for somebody else to log in, My favorite one was when this guy told me he tried to hide the fact at first, but then I found out, and then he told me that he was hiring his mother to help him with his bookkeeping. It's like, good luck with that. And when he eventually admitted to me, I said, does she have, experience? He's like, no, but, I figure she can pick it up. It's pretty easy. She knows how to write a check.
Pretty simple, right? Yeah. I mean, how hard could it be, really?
Yeah, if I know how to write a check, I can do bookkeeping, right?
Exactly.
That's all I need to know. All right. Has it been 3 minutes yet? We got a few more people in. Look at this. Greg, I'm going to make you co-host so you can help me out letting people in as they join.
All right. I probably be muted most of the time. I'm in a somewhat loud coffee shop.
Does that mean you're a mutant? Get it? Come on, I'm funny today.
Today, huh?
Just today. Just for today.
Limited time only.
I'll be here all day. All right. Let's get this party started. I said in my best Boston accent, there's a guy I know that I see generally every Tuesday night. He has a thick Boston accent, so I always kind of get onto things like that. Anyway, let's talk about bookkeeping. Let's talk about charging setup fees. So just for background and context, I was in the bookkeeping side hustle group on Facebook which, by the way, if you're part of that group and that's why you're here or how you found out about this, and you do ultimately decide to sign up for Bulletproof Bookkeeping, please make sure to get the affiliate link from Katie, because I don't know if she goes by Katie or Kate. I think I always mess that up. But anyway, I want to make sure she gets credit for sending you. I obviously send her a little thank you for anybody that she sends my way, which of course is why we have the whole affiliate program. And if you want to, you can do the same thing. You can sign up to be an affiliate, and you can send people and get paid a little bit of money as my way of saying thank you for the referral. So first, make sure you love the course, right? I wouldn't want you referring it if you didn't love it. Anyway, so it was in her group that somebody had posted, and this was a while back, actually. It was a few months back. And they said that, I guess they were on a webinar, and, they didn't mention names, but there was some quote unquote accounting guru on the webinar talking, and apparently going as far as to claim that they felt that charging a setup fee was, it was taking advantage of the customer somehow. I would have loved to have heard more context on why this person might have felt that way. Because it sounds like a weird thing to say. I don't see how it could be perceived as taking advantage in any context, really. I mean, and that's, and I want to make clear right up front, before I kind of go deeper into the subject, that yes, I have charged setup fees. I don't always, but I have done it because, let's face it, what happens is and here's how it probably happens. I'm guessing most of you can probably relate to what I'm about to share, is that I'll find myself sitting there, and once they've pulled the trigger and signed the agreement, the first thing I usually do, in my case, I always get paid up front. I will not do any work until the money's in the bank. So I'll send them the link to make their first payment, and then you're spending time setting things up, right? Now, the truth is I've automated pretty much all of that at this point, right? The way I have my system set up, once they agree to become a new client, then I send them a link to a form that they fill out, and then Zapier comes in and grabs the data they submitted on that form, and in some cases takes pieces of it and puts it together to name things the way my naming convention is designed, and it will set up everything. It'll set up Google Drive. It'll set up Smartsheet. It will set up all the services that I need set up for that client. It will set up for me. So I don't have to do anything, really, setup-wise that way. For me, if I'm doing setup work, it's not setting up the services. It's maybe some other thing. It's maybe reviewing their QuickBooks file to figure out what I need to make sure I've got access to, right? Because in my case, I try to insist on the clients giving us access, empowering us to get the access to everything we need, so that I don't have to, frankly, get slowed down by waiting for the client to get me what I need, right?
Right.
So that's the kind of setup that I have to usually start doing at that point, is making that determination. What do I need access to? And then I'll put together that what I call request for information for the client. So that's the time where I'm sitting there and I'm maybe doing that, and I'm realizing, this is actually taking a fair amount of time. And maybe to put it more appropriately, because I don't like to talk in terms of how much time it takes. I really am a strong proponent of the value pricing concepts, where we don't charge for our time, we charge for the value of what we put out there, right? So the way I like to frame it, and the way I like to think of it more is, clients pay me for my attention, right? I'm paying attention to them. And yes, that seems almost like it's not much different than talking about it in terms of time, but it is actually a little different. I think there are definitely some differences between what it means to track the time I spend versus what it means to pay attention to somebody, right? So the bottom line is, that's when I found myself feeling like, I really should be charging a setup fee, because it's if nothing else, it's distracting me from doing other things that could be bringing more money in the door. Now I'm setting this stuff up. Granted, I only have to do it once. So that's when I'm inclined to find myself wanting to charge the setup fee. And I think that the concern that I have, though, and the reason I would maybe, and again, I'm going to give you kind of both sides of the argument, more than two sides, actually. But one of the arguments that I have against charging a setup fee is it isn't really of any value to the client, right? The setup that I'm doing is to set up my own systems that make my life easier, that help me get the stuff done more efficiently. It's kind of like when we sometimes will go to a client and say, well, I want to use bill.com to pay your bills, and they don't want to pay for it because their thing is, well, that's helping you. It's not helping me. Why should I have to pay for something that's there to make your life easier? course, the response to that is fine, but if we're not going to use bill.com, then I got to charge you more. So you're either going to pay me or pay bill.com, right? So it's kind of like, that's the little tennis volley we end up having to have, which, by the way, is why I generally like to just include the cost of those services in my flat monthly fee so that I don't have to have those conversations with people, right? So that's one of my arguments against charging a setup fee is when you talk about things in terms of value, it really is of no value to the client when they have to pay me to set things up, right? So here's what I like to throw out there as an alternative, let's just call it, to charging a setup fee, because it's something you're going to have to do. And as I pointed out, it is what I wind up really having to do by way of setup anyway, which is, and oftentimes we've gotten to this by the time they're ready to sign the agreement, but not always. And what I'm talking about is going through their balance sheet, doing a review of their books, right? So what I often like to do, even well before the point that we're talking about today, when they first come in the door and they're asking questions and want to know what kind of services we offer and what that looks like, how we provide it, a lot of times what I'll do, and this becomes my sort of setup fee, is I'll say, look, just to get started out, let's get you on my calendar for a 1-hour session with me. It's a paid session. It costs $325 for me to get on a Zoom with a client for 1 hour. That's what I charge. But in that hour, what we'll do is we'll get online. I'll have you share your screen with me, and we're going to cut through your balance sheet line by line, and we're going to find out. We're going to dig deep into what's going on with your books. And we're going to get a sense of the scope, if there's cleanup work to be done, and for that matter, what has to be managed by way of doing the ongoing bookkeeping work for the client. And I feel like that's the best way to cover the setup fee, because that is going to provide a tremendous amount of value to the client, especially the fact that we're doing that review with them. And so, and it's the only way to do it as far as I'm concerned. Of course I could do it without them, but there's so much more insight that they could provide and immediate feedback that can now go both ways, that it's crazy to me not to include them in the process, because then right there on the spot, I can be looking at their AR aging and ask them to comment on it. And based on that feedback, I can immediately know what has to be done. I can't tell you how many times I run the aging. There's negative amounts in there, which of course begs the question, did we actually receive a payment in advance, really a deposit from a customer, and we just received it as a payment, so it's sitting there as negative AR until we've earned and invoiced it? Or did we make a mistake somewhere? Did we post an invoice, receive a payment, and then delete that invoice, despite the numerous warnings from QuickBooks? Clients do that, right? So that's the question, and it comes up almost every time I run an AR aging on a newer prospective client, is I always find those kinds of things. The other thing I often come across is, and this can only be determined if the client is there looking at it with me, is because the client will look at it and they'll see a particular customer and they'll see an aging amount in, let's say, over 90, and they'll say, I know that client paid. And so now I'm like, now we're getting somewhere, right? Because first of all, now they're starting to see that we're not blowing smoke when we tell them, hey, there's cleanup work that needs to be done. They're going to be the ones at that point to tell us, hey, I need your help cleaning this up, because they're seeing it firsthand. And of course, we can address that very specifically in the moment and say, look, if you're certain that was paid, I don't doubt you. My experience has been that the business owners, know what's going on with their books. They may not be able to articulate it perfectly, and they certainly don't know how to fix a problem like that when they see it. But if a client tells me that they know that that customer paid them, I believe them. And so then on that basis, I'll tell them, look, what that likely means is we invoiced the client, got the money, recorded a deposit, booked it straight to income, and now we've got our receivables overstated and we've got our income overstated. But the good news is it's easy to find and fix that. All we have to do is find the payment that includes that payment, and find the deposit that includes that payment in it. And there's a simple process for, receiving the payment against the invoice and then swapping that out inside the original deposit, so that even if it's been reconciled, we don't have to worry about upsetting the reconciliation, right? So that's kind of a deep dive in the example of what goes on during that review process, which even when we've gotten just that far, I can almost guarantee you the client's going to say this was worth the $325 just for that alone. But what I'm also doing as I do this review with the client is I'm really keeping in the back of my mind and also making notes about it and thinking, now I see what I have to manage for the client. Right? We always have to manage the bank accounts and the bank feeds and the bank recs, right? That's how I look at the balance sheet. It's my checklist for everything I've got to manage. right? So I've got to manage that. I've got to manage the accounts receivable and make sure that the client is on top of the payments. Make sure that, if I'm going to be taking over the bookkeeping work, then I know how not to make that mistake with the receivables, right? But it looks like maybe there's going to be some cleaning up, and I'll have to go through the client and make that AR aging into a checklist of sorts and have the client go through it and tell me, and identify any other ones that they feel certain were paid, right? And so when I do that review, I'm not going to clean up all the accounts receivable. I might go through one just to prove to them that my theory is correct, which it usually is, because I've been doing this for a minute. And usually that's why when they say something's been paid, that's usually the answer. And I can usually search the amount and find it pretty quickly and show it to them and show them what the fix is. And some of them might look at that and say, oh, I get that. I can fix those myself. Great, have at it. And again, they've definitely got the value for their 325 if I've now taught them how to clean it up on their own. Most clients will look at that. They'll say, I get it, but I don't want to do it. I don't have the time to do it. I want you to do it. And boom. So now we start increasing the value of our stock in the client's eyes. And most importantly, what normally I think happens, maybe I shouldn't say normally, maybe I should say frequently, is if we do that kind of review on our own and we go to the client and say, hey, there's all these old receivables, this needs to get cleaned up. Maybe they trust us, maybe they don't. They don't know us well enough to really trust us yet, right? That's why I love the idea of them seeing it firsthand and doing it with me. Plus the fact, like I said, that, the immediate feedback going both ways, that in itself provides tremendous value for both me and the client or prospect, right? So that's how I kind of address the bookkeeping setup fee. Is instead of charging a setup fee, I'd rather charge them to do the review of the books with them, right? And then at the end of the day, I'll give them the recording from that Zoom session. They can review it, do whatever they want with it. If they're not absolutely convinced by the end of that hour that they need to hire me, maybe I'll do a couple of follow-ups. I'm not going to harass the people, and whether it's true or not, frankly, I want to sort of leave them with the impression that I've got a lot going on, because if I seem desperate, then again, that kind of diminishes the value of my services in their eyes. But if they get the impression that I'm super busy, and it's going to sound kind of wrong when I say this, but we almost want to paint the picture that they need us more than we need them, kind of thing, right? Because that's how we get the value perception up there. And that's why when I go to them often and I say, yeah, for the cleanup work, we're just going to charge $500 for each month of cleanup that needs to get done, which yes means if we're doing a whole year, we're going to charge $6,000. So I basically charge them $325 to do that review, figure out the scope of the cleanup that's needed, take the number of months that need to be cleaned up times 500, give that to them as the estimate, right? I don't care how many transactions there are. I get so annoyed when I hear people talking about, well, how many transactions are there? Because if we're using technology the right way, this day and age, the number of transactions should be totally irrelevant, because I can import 5 transactions or 500 in pretty much the exact same amount of time, right? So the number of transactions should never be a factor, in my opinion, of course. So is it taking advantage of the client to charge a setup fee? No, but I think maybe what that guru meant to say is what I'm saying, because it's the only way I can think that it makes sense. Maybe what they really meant when they said taking advantage of the client, it's just that it means we're charging the client for something that's really of no value to them. We're charging it to them because we have to spend the time doing that setup. But like I said, and again, it goes right back to what I just said about technology and automation and efficiency. These days, you can completely automate setting up whatever services you need. I have the client basically do that for me by filling out the form, and then Zapier comes in and goes and sets everything up, right? And I'll shamelessly self-promote here. If you're wondering how to do that, I've got a course actually that's specifically called Automate the Onboarding Process. It teaches you and it gives you the choice of different tools to use, because not everybody always likes all the same tools. So it gives you the choice of different tools to use and teaches you how to build that exact process that I'm describing. For me, they fill out the form in Airtable, but you could do it in Google Sheets or Smartsheet, just the same. And then Zapier comes in and sets up these services. So that part that we normally think of as setup, there is no setup to do. It's done. It's automatic, right? Like I said, the setup for me really means trying to figure out what I need from them in order to get started properly, which if I've done that initial review with them and charged them the $325, then I've gotten $325. And now that I've got a real clear picture of their balance sheet, and of course I'm going to, if I don't have access to their company file yet, I'm either going to ask them for the access or I'm going to ask them to send me, an export of their balance sheet and P&L. And if I think the client is sort of savvy enough to not be confused by this, I'll ask them for the trial balance report for the last year as well. Because I like looking at the trial balance for the obvious reason that it's got everything really in one place, all your P&L and all your balance sheet accounts. So it really gives me the complete list of what has to be managed. But like I said, by and large, to me, the balance sheet is the main driver of what's got to be managed. The P&L has a way of taking care of itself, which is not to say that the P&L should be ignored. I just don't think it requires as much emphasis as the balance sheet does, right? So, that's really, that's kind of my main answer on that. Should you charge a setup fee? Okay. And I've given you, I think, arguments both ways. The argument for it is, I've got to spend some time doing this. I've got to pay them some attention to get things set up to get it right. The argument against is that's really more for you than it is for the client. It's more to make your life easier. So here's another thing I wanted to throw out for consideration on this subject, and we talked about this a lot recently in one of our 97 and up calls, which if you're not familiar with 97 and up, I'm looking at the list of participants. I think everybody here is. Most of you are actually already in the program. But for the few who aren't, in 97 and up, we do 2 weekly calls. And one of the recent calls we did, we talked about this kind of thing, where we talked about the unique selling proposition, right, or USP. And one of the ways in which you can differentiate yourself is that you can maybe that's what maybe that's how you sell clients on giving you a try, is by selling it on the fact that you don't charge a setup fee, right? It's a way of making you stand out. If a prospect is interviewing different bookkeeping services and they're all saying, yeah, we charge a setup fee, and then you come in there and say no setup fee, that's going to get their attention, right? What you're doing is you're sort of reducing, if not eliminating, their risk. And that's what a unique selling proposition is all about. It's about reducing, eliminating, or better still, reversing the risk, right? The more risk you take on, the more inclined a client is going to be to try you out, right? We even talked about this, and of course, everybody looked at me and kind of laughed at me when I said this, but I'm not making this stuff up. This comes directly from Jay Abraham, whom I've been studying for a number of months now. And it's what he suggests, that you can go as far as to say, and I just brought it into the context of a bookkeeping service, but imagine if you went out there and started putting some posts on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and wherever else you post things. Imagine if you went out there and started saying, not only don't we charge a setup fee, we'll do your first month of bookkeeping for free. Try us out, right? Imagine what that might do to your sales, right? Because that'll get it. So what it comes down to, back to the ultimate question, do you charge a setup fee or not? Is it right to do it? Is it wrong to do it? I think nobody can actually say it's always right or always wrong to do it. I think a lot of it is very subjective, right? And I think a lot of it really is going to come down to a supply and demand kind of thing, right? Quite frankly, I can get away with charging a setup fee because a lot of times by the time somebody comes in my door, they've been watching my videos on YouTube, they're already sold, right? They've probably tried a few other solutions out that they figured, because they probably figured I'm going to be expensive. And I am, I think, compared to most. So by the time they come in the door, they expect that it's going to cost. And of course, they expect the value in return. So supply and demand wise, should you charge a setup fee? The question I would throw back at you on that is, how badly do you need the business, right? If you need the business real bad, you probably should not charge a setup fee, because it's a deterrent. It's going to make somebody pause and say, maybe I want to go somewhere else. I don't feel like being charged the setup fee. There's no value in it for me, right? They're charging me for something that's really just for them and not for me, right? Unless you can find a way to establish the value that they're getting in exchange for that setup fee, right? Maybe you can talk about it in terms of the fact that, hey, we charge a setup fee because we use a lot of really sophisticated systems that make things efficient. And the efficiency, yes, is for me, but the benefit to you as the customer is, we'll have you set up in a month instead of the normal 3 months that other services might take to really have you completely set up and running, right? In other words, that's how you kind of spin it and show them that there's value in paying the setup fee. By explaining it that way, although it might be a bit of a stretch, or at least might be perceived as a stretch. So do you need the business? If you really need the business, you probably shouldn't charge a setup fee. But if you're up to your eyeballs and you don't even know how you're going to make the time to take on the next client, then yeah, charge a setup fee, right? Because it's kind of it also has a way of positioning yourself and saying, I'm busy, I'm up to my eyeballs. I need to know that you're serious about working with me. And one of the ways I make you prove that you're serious is by asking you to pay me a setup fee, right? And I actually, you know where I still charge setup fees pretty frequently is on the lower end clients, believe it or not. So, you know, I offer a very light bookkeeping service for like $250 a month. It was my way of going out there and competing with QuickBooks Live. I said, you know what, if they can do it, I can do it. On a real simple business, I can pretty much, you know, within the first month, I can have all the rules created for the bank feeds in QBO, that I can pretty much automate the whole bookkeeping process for a real simple business like that. So I said, fine, I'm going to throw it out there. And I did. I've gotten some startup companies that I've attracted in who were looking, they were probably shopping for cheap bookkeeping solutions. And a few of them within the first few months, I'm able to, once I've established the value and, you know, how they get their data in real time, because it is all automated. So anytime they need a report, it's there and it's up to date and it's done. It's usually not more than a month or 2 or 3, after which I'm able to say, you know what, can we raise the fee by $100 a month? And I've never had somebody even balk at that. They just say, yeah, sure, fine. You know, because they're thinking, what's another $100 a month? Who cares? The guy's clearly doing a good job. So where I charge setup fees, though, is on those lower end, like $250 a month clients. And here's where I definitely charge it. So like one that came in recently, I wanted to charge them $500 a month. And he balked at that and said, you know, it's a startup. There's not a lot going on. You know, can you do better? So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for $250 a month with the understanding that we're going to revisit this. And if it turns out that the scope is such that I'm not comfortable continuing at $250 a month, we're going to have to revisit this conversation sooner rather than later. And I said, and then I'm also going to want a setup fee of another month, so that at least the first month I'm getting $500 instead of the $250, right? So it's sort of my way of saying, fine, you know, I'll cut you the deal, but basically I made him buy down the rate by paying for that month up front. You know, the other alternative was he was going to go somewhere else. You know, that was pretty clear. So so that's where I do charge setup fees, is on the lower end clients, because, you know, for them it does almost feel like it's just kind of a pain in the neck for as little money as we're going to be getting paid, you know, that I have to take the time to, you know, set up the systems, whatever it is.
Seth, this is Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
You may have mentioned this in the first part of the call and I didn't hear it, but what I'm kind of wondering is defining what setup is, because I think there might be a lot of different ideas about whether it's setting someone up on QuickBooks Online for the first time. Is it transitioning, you know, QBT, you know, like to me that's setup as well, not just adding apps to maybe an existing QBO account. So I'm just curious what you're thinking about when you're talking about setup.
Well, all right. So I think what I've spoken to along those lines is that first and foremost, we typically think of having to set up the services that we're going to use. Like in my case, I need them in Google Drive and I need a Smartsheet project set up for them. And I'm going to set them up in ClickUp, you know, for project management, you know, just all those services, which then I pointed out earlier that I've automated all that. So for me, that setup is no longer required, because I just ask them to fill out a form and Zapier sets everything up for me. Right? So I think that's the kind of stuff that a lot of us think of as the setup required. But then I also said that the setup that I still find myself doing, and that's sometimes when I start thinking I do need to charge a setup fee, excuse me, is when I have to, you know, establish the things that I need access to, right? Having reviewed the balance sheet once I need access to the bank accounts. I need access to the credit card accounts, or I need to create the system for how I'm going to get that. If the client for some reason doesn't want to give me logins, then I need to establish a system for how I'm going to get that information. And then if they're not willing to give me their logins, you know, these days in most cases they can set up read-only user access, which is what I always suggest that they do. And if for some reason they're not even willing to do that, then there's some other things that I have to establish with them. Like, okay, then I'll give you a way to upload this stuff to me, but now I have to add on some policies and explain to them that we schedule a set time and day every single week that we work on your stuff. And if we don't have what we need by the time that time comes, it's going to result in a week's delay. In other words, if you just get it to me that day, or if you get it to me the next day, I'm not going to stop and rearrange my schedule to get that done now. We'll just work on it next week when we get to the same day and time, right? So those are the kinds of setup things I'm talking about that, you know, that we might be thinking of that needs to be addressed, and why we might need to charge for that setup, right?
Can I say something? Okay, I'm glad you asked that question, because when I'm thinking setup for me, because I always charge for setup, I'm actually talking about I'm in your QuickBooks Online file. I'm setting up your vendors, your customers, the rules. I'm setting up everything, and I'm doing 1 month worth of bookkeeping in the process of setting up.
Exactly.
That's my definition of setting up. So I've actually started the work. So
That's mine too. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I've looked at it, but I'm glad, Seth, you brought it up because I wasn't thinking about it in the way you've been presenting it. So.
Right. Me
either.
So we have to clarify also, are we talking about a brand new company where all that needs to be set up? Because even when it comes to vendors and customers, I don't sit there sort of intentionally sitting there and saying, what vendors do I need to set up? I'm going to add in the vendors on the fly when I'm doing the bank feeds, right?
Well, yeah, that's pretty much what I do, but you're still, you're still setting it up because you're taking all of their bank statements. I have clients that come to me and they want me to set them up on QuickBooks. So we start with, let's say 2019, or let's say we're in 2020 right now. So I'll have them connect their accounts and, grab all the information and include the vendors and the customers just by on the fly as I'm setting them up, and then just doing everything else.
Right.
And
So, all right. So
time consuming.
I think where we may be overlapping here, Desiree, is what I would not call setup at all, what I would call cleanup or reconstruction, right? If we're talking about going back and reconstructing all of 2019, that's not setup at all to me. That's
no, not 19. What I meant to say was in 2020, they want to start a file. They don't have QuickBooks and they want to create QuickBooks. So we're in 2020 right now. So what I do is I set up the entire system. And in doing so, I also include one month. Now, if, for example, I had to go back and do 19, or let's say we're in 2020 now, and it was July of 2020, and they want to just create a QuickBooks file, I let them know I'll set you up, and it's going to include 1 month's worth of bookkeeping. If you want me to continue your bookkeeping, then this is what it's going to cost moving forward. But I will also try to train you or show you how to do, follow along with what I did.
Right. So I guess it's just a different way of saying the same thing. The way I approach that with clients is I tell them this is the monthly fee. And if we're in February and I've got to do January and February, you're going to pay me up front for 2 months, basically, because you're going to pay me for January because I'm going to reconstruct that. And you're going to pay me for February because I'm going to get February caught up and then continue it. My assumption is always that they're continuing with me, that there's no question about whether I'm just going to set them up and then they're going to be off and running on their own. Because in truth, if that's the way they want to go to begin with, then what I'm normally going to suggest to them is that they sign up for one of my live support plans, which I consider training, not consulting, and then I'll just work with them. And I'll and if need be, if they're that sort of basic in their knowledge level or experience, then I'll get online in a Zoom with them and have them share their screen, and I'll have them do their own setup, but I'll train them. I'll teach them how to do it. I'll teach them how to do the bank feeds. I'll teach them how to add the vendors on the fly. I mean, adding a vendor on the fly, unless for some reason I got to stop and add in all their address info, which is rarely the case in my experience, I don't care, because it's what it is. It's 2 seconds. I just say add new. I choose that it's a vendor and I click OK and I continue, right? And the other thing is, if there's back work to be done, I'm often not going to do it in the bank feeds. I'm going to get a CSV from their bank account, and I'm going to code it there, and I'm going to import it probably with Sassant, because Sassant, you can do more mapping of things than you can doing the actual bank feeds import process, right? So, I mean, obviously it has to be looked at case by case, but I guess, Desiree, what you're now describing as a setup fee is what I would simply say is what I'm charging to do the month of January, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, right? But I think I get the impression when people talk setup fee, what they're really talking about is getting paid for the time essentially that we have to spend getting the client set up, right? Now, if the client's in business already and they just want to start with QBO and they don't want to migrate data, right? And maybe they're going to give me a vendor list and a customer list that they exported from their QuickBooks desktop, let's say, right? And then we're going to need to clean those, get rid of all the ones we don't really need anymore, and then import those. Yeah, I'll quote them a separate fee for that, for that kind of stuff, no question. But again, I wouldn't call it a setup fee. I would just call it a quote for a project of getting that stuff and, cleaned up and in place, right? Okay. That there's tremendous value in, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess it's really about the vernacular, because we all have different terminologies for different things.
Yeah.
Because when I think setup, I'm thinking when a client has a brand new QBO file and they want me to set them up on QuickBooks, and this is what I do to set them up. So
yeah, and I think one thing I want to point out, and I don't think this is you, Desiree, but I'm speaking very generally here. I think it's important, like when I approach the dialogue I'm going to have with this prospect, there seems to come a point in time, and this is just based on the conversations I've had with a lot of different people in our profession. It almost feels sometimes, and again, I want to stress, Desiree, I don't think this is you, but it feels sometimes like a lot of us, it's almost like we get into this almost adversarial dialogue with the client. Well, I'm not doing this unless you pay me, and I try to really approach it from a very different perspective. I really want the client walking away from the experience and the conversation with me with this feeling of, holy cow, I can't believe all that this guy is doing for me and how little he charged for it, right? I really want them, in other words, I want them to feel like they're getting so much value in exchange for what they're paying me, right? I want them to feel like they would have paid twice that, right? Now, some people would say to me, if they would have paid twice that, then you left money on the table. And my response to that is, if I'm excited as hell about what I'm getting paid, I don't care, right? And that's why I always tell people, charge what gets you excited to do the work, because if I'm excited to do the work, I'm going to do a really good job. And quite frankly, my level of excitement is going to change with time and experience, right? The more experienced I get, frankly, the more money it takes to get me excited to do the work, because I get busier and busier. I attract more and more clients and work. And, so now, I mean, it was already many years ago now that I remember somebody calling me up and wanting to do a one-on-one training with me. And at that, nowadays, I told you earlier, I charge $325 for that. In those days, I was charging like $185 for an hour of training. And this person called me from Florida, and she's like, she's asking me about it and telling me what she needs help with. And I suggested the hour training. And of course she asked the rate. I said, it's $185. And she was like, whoa, she was really taken back. And she says, I can call somebody local to me and have them come to my place for $75 an hour. And, I figured I'd make one effort to, make her see the value and the difference. And I said, look, I get that. I have people who call me up who are local to me here in Burbank, and they ask me to come in person. The reason I insist on not doing it that way is because remotely I can record the session and provide you with that recording, which to me makes the training much more valuable. I can't really record a training session if I'm there in person. I mean, what am I going to do? Bring a camera and a tripod and video the screen? It's not practical, right? So I said that to her, and she balked once again. And when somebody's going from 185 to 75, it's not worth my time trying to convince her. So like I said, I made one effort, and when that effort didn't, change her perspective, or at least seem like it was moving her in the right direction, I just let her go. Basically, my answer in a very polite way was, if you can get somebody to do it for $75, then go call them, because I'm not doing it for $75, right? So that's the other thing, is what I'm willing to, to do, and how much how much money it's going to take to get me excited to do it. It's going to change. It really boils down to supply and demand. The more demand there is for what I'm doing, the more it's going to take to get me excited to do it, right? And that's the bottom line. That's the economics 101 of it. So, again, charging the setup fee, I think it's important. I think, Desiree, you raised a very good point. We have to define what exactly we mean by setup, right? And then, because sometimes it is going to come down to nomenclature, and what you call setup, I might just call the work, and vice versa. So yeah, we have to define it. So bottom line, if we're going to say to a client or prospect that we charge a $500 setup fee, we have to be prepared to explain what that's for, right? Because again, what you're calling a setup fee, Desiree, there's clearly value in it for the client. My concern when a lot of us talk about a setup fee is we're talking about setting up our own internal systems to handle that client, and there's no value in that for the client.
Right.
None whatsoever.
Yeah. And usually before I actually do a setup, I have a consultation with them first. So we have a very thorough consultation to talk about what their needs are and what I'm going to be doing for them. And once I explain to them everything I'm going to be doing, I then send them out an engagement letter that lists everything that I'll do for them from, and it looks like a whole lot, but we know that it doesn't take that long to do it. But when you look at it, it's a long list of everything that I'm going to be doing for you. Mm-hmm. And they sign the engagement letter, make the payments, and then I start the process.
Right. See, in that initial consultation, well, let's put it this way. My comparable process is I'll do a 30-minute call, right? And I used to not even be willing to do that call on Zoom. Now I do, because frankly, I realized it makes my life easier, especially because I've got it all automated now. So when somebody goes in and schedules their 30-minute call with me, there's a direct integration I've set up between Schedule Once, which is the calendar app that I use, and Zoom. So they make the 30-minute appointment, Zoom will actually, or Schedule Once will ping Zoom and set up the meeting and then email them the confirmation. So it's completely automated. So I'll do that first consultation like you talked about, Desiree, for free. But 30 minutes, and it's really just going to be about me. And I've been saying this constantly lately. It comes up all the time in our 97 and Up group. And Hector and I were just talking about that on Friday's Zoom webinar that I do, that I don't like checklists, right? Usually when I get on that initial consultation, I'm going to just start off simply with the prospect by saying, tell me what's going on. And then I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let them go. I'm going to let them just unload on me, everything that's on their minds. Because oftentimes, there would be things that if I was going off some checklist that I wouldn't really give them the chance to explain, because I'm just going down my checklist and asking them questions. But by letting them kind of do it and making the conversation more organic, I find that there are things that come out that result in more services I can offer them, which means, frankly, I can make more money. But it's not about just getting money out of them. It's about providing value. It's about giving them what they need. And of course, they're happy to pay for that, right? So I really like that way of approaching that initial consultation. Then to do the review, if we want to, as soon as I have to, have them share their screen so I can go through their balance sheet with them, that's where I am going to charge them the $325 and I'll say, look, even if you don't go forward with me, I guarantee you after that 1 hour, you're going to find there's tremendous value in that, much more than the $325 worth. So even if you don't go forward with me, you'll have a very clear picture of what's going on with your bookkeeping, where the holes are, so to speak, and what needs to be fixed, and probably even a good sense of how to fix it, so that if you don't want to continue with me, if you think you can take it from there, that's fine. If not, I'm here when you need me, right? So that's how I do that. And then, like I said earlier, when I'm done with that 1 hour review, I'll make sure I have a way of getting a copy of their balance sheet should they want to go forward. And I use that balance sheet as my checklist for all the things I need to get information from them about, such as logins. And then the other thing I do, going back to the logins thing, especially if I'm going to be doing anything having to do with their AP process, whether it's paying the bills or just managing it, I'm going to go into their books and run an expenses by vendor summary for, let's say, a year totaled by month. And I'm going to drop that into Excel, and I'm going to just look for what are the ones that are clearly recurring, where they're clearly paying them every month or just about every month. The ones that are clearly like one-offs, I'll eliminate from the list, because what I'm doing is I'm chiseling it down to the list of vendors that I think I'm going to need access to. And then I put that in a Smartsheet project and list it for them and say, I need logins for all these services. Or if it's a service who emails you their invoice, then great, I have a system for that, right? And I'll explain what that system is for how they can route those emails to me. And then for me, it's going to go either into BillBees for bill pay or whatever, or maybe bill.com, whatever it is that I'm using. But, so that's the other part of that kind of onboarding process that really can't be automated, that I'm going to do that. Then the question is, do I want to charge a setup fee for that? It depends. If it's a client that's going to be paying me like $1,500 a month, I'm probably not going to charge them a setup fee, right? But if it's a client that's paying me, like I said earlier, $250, $500 a month, I might want to charge them a fee for that setup. But again, I hesitate on that, for the reasons I've said. It's really of no value to the client. It's basically me making them pay me to do what I need to set up either way, right? So again, it's a question of, is there a way that I can present this to the client from the perspective of how it adds value for them? Anybody else? A few of you have been quiet. Melissa, I'm going to call you out. You still with us?
Yeah, I am. I'm multitasking, so I've been kind of in and out. But
do you charge a setup fee? How do you handle this?
Well, usually I haven't had to set people up. I have to clean them up, because they've set it up and then they've screwed it up and then they fire me. So it's not really setting them up.
So yeah, cleanup, like I was saying to Desiree before. If I'm going back and fixing the past, that's what I call cleanup or reconstruction or whatever, right?
Right. So I don't have very many people that don't have a QuickBooks file at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I'm just curious to go around and
something. Now I actually am setting this person up and doing all of their 2019 bookkeeping, and it's because I'm taking them out of they were using QuickBooks for Mac, I can't just really import it because there's a lot of screwed up gunk in the back end of it. So I just started over clean with the accounts and everything after the accountant had done her taxes. So I might charge a little extra for that because it's turning out to be a little more problematic than just, like switching from desktop to QBO or something and doing a simple import. But maybe not, maybe not.
I know for me, for most of my, because I have two niches, hair beauty industry professionals like hair salons, and then nonprofits. For my beauty industry professionals, I'm doing a lot of setup because they don't have a QuickBooks file, or they don't even have an accounting or bookkeeping system. So I'm sort of introducing them to that. It's like brand new for them because you know how they are. But as for my nonprofit clients, I do more cleanup for them because a lot of them can't really afford maybe a bookkeeper or an accountant, so they try to do it themselves and they mess it up. So I have to go in and clean up their files.
Right.
So that's what I'm finding.
Yep. Yeah, and the cleanup is something we've talked about a lot, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again because it's always, a big issue and question. Because almost every client I get, they come in because they need the cleanup, and then so those I definitely don't charge a setup fee for because I'm usually going to charge them, like I said, about $500 per month of reconstruction. So I feel like that more than covers any setup that might have had to go along with that. And I found that, because that's what we've had detailed conversations about in many different forums over the years in terms of, how do you price a cleanup job, right? And I used to struggle with it just like everybody else does, and so I used to have a system where I would actually use the balance sheet, and I had my system of weights and rates that I would use based on what needed to be reconstructive. And again, I always defer to the balance sheet as my checklist for that. And I had that system and that worked pretty well. But after I had so many experiences of doing these kind of cleanup jobs, eventually I said, you know what works really well for me, what gets me excited to do the work is if I'm just going to charge $500 for every month, that has to be reconstructed, right? Because the way we can do it now, as efficient as we can be by getting the CSV files and coding them, I will often take that entire year, if it's a year that I'm doing, and I will get I always get the individual monthly statements in CSV format. Then I'll combine them into one master file for the year, a column for the QuickBooks payee for the outgoing money, a column for the QuickBooks account. Obviously, the incoming money has to be dealt with a little differently because we need to understand where that came from and what they're selling and how they're selling it. So that's a different story. But on the expenses side, I will often prep in a single file the entire year, and using SASANT, I'll do the import pretty much in a click, because importing expense transactions like that, very, very quick and easy to do. Then we got to deal with the incoming funds. And sometimes I've found, even on that side, I'll do a simple import of all the incoming funds, and I'll run all the deposits into some kind of a clearing account. And then I'll go and deal with the sales, and then kind of, run the sales ultimately through the same clearing and let it wash out that way. And then any incoming funds that weren't based on income, I will deal with accordingly. So I can, in other words, on that basis, I can usually get a cleanup job done in very short order. So to me, charging $500 per month, sometimes they'll balk and say, wow, that's $6,000 for a whole year. Like, why does it cost so much? And I say, are you kidding me? What do you think it would cost you to hire a bookkeeper? If you had hired a bookkeeper to do it all year, it would have cost you 3 times that much or more, right? So to me, $6,000, at first, it seems like a lot of money to them. But when you explain it that way, they usually see it as a bargain. And they should, because it is. Greg, you got something?
I got whatever you.
Well, you came back on. I thought maybe you wanted to share something.
Well, I was just trying to thwart you calling me out.
Oh, all right. So now I'm calling you out. You got it.
So as far as setup goes, for me, again, I have the same definition of setup that a lot of these other folks have, as far as getting them set up in QuickBooks Online. If I'm bringing them on from scratch, there's definitely a fee. I think I do like $250. It's just something to get the ball rolling because it is a little bit more intensive to start out from scratch. As far as the onboarding, which I think is a separate topic, the onboarding itself shouldn't be billed necessarily. I know that some people do charge an onboarding fee. I don't ascribe to that
Mm-hmm.
school of thought, because like you, I get it mostly automated, from from when they fill out the form. Everything gets filled out, ClickUp, and Google Drive, and all of those other ancillary services that we use to make our job easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about making our job easier too. And so if we can avoid the um, giving the client an increased cost, when we can avoid it, then all the better.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversations with the clients where, we do all the talking about what needs to be done and what I'm going to charge for it. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I like to include the costs of any apps in the monthly fee that I'm going to charge them. And oftentimes we get to that part of the conversation and where they apparently and very clearly are expecting that the fee I'm quoting them doesn't include the apps. And then they'll ask me and I'll say, yeah, it's all included. That's all they need to hear. And then from in that moment, that's when they'll say, okay, how do we get started? Like, it's a great way to sell, right? Is by, and it might even be that you increase what you would otherwise have charged per month to accommodate the cost of those apps. That's fine, because it's all perception. It's all perspective, right? In the client's eyes, you've just increased the value that they're getting because they thought it was going to be extra. So, and that's what I did. At one point I sat down and I said, well, what does Bill.com really cost me for the typical client? I know there's per transaction fees and all that, but at one point I think I figured if I'm factoring in even an extra $100 or $150 a month for most clients' volume, that seemed to work when I sort of broke it down that way. But then over the years, and as my fees got higher, like when I'm charging $1,500 a month for a client, which is a fairly typical monthly fee when I'm doing bookkeeping for, for anything bigger than a pretty small company, I'm like, at that rate, I'm not going to nickel and dime them over the cost of the apps. And I would consider it nickel and diming them to sit there and say, on top of the $1,500, you've got to pay me extra for these apps. There's certain apps I don't include if they're using something like T-Sheets. Hey, look, Greg, we're both representing T-Sheets today. I got my hat. You got your shirt. T-Sheets I don't include. To me, that's extra because that's something they really need to take on directly so they can manage it. It's their employees, So T-Sheets is not something I'm ever going to include in my monthly fee. But Bill.com, a lot of the other apps that I use, definitely include it. Even QuickBooks Online fees. That's the big one that they're always wondering. So I tell them it's included, and oftentimes they don't realize that it's not really costing me that much because they probably went online and checked and saw that QBO Plus was $70 a month, and so they're coming in expecting I'm going to charge them an extra $70 a month over what I'm quoting. Little do they know it's really only costing me $35 a month at wholesale, and so when I tell them I'm including it, to them that's an added value of $70 a month, even though it's really only costing me $35. So. It's all perception, and it's not that I won't be honest with them. If they ask me, I'll tell them. I'll say, look, I get it at wholesale. It's $35 a month. It's no big deal for me to include it for you. But it's still, the value is still $70 a month to them because that's what they would have to pay if they went out on their own and directly paid for the subscription. Right? So there's that. So this is interesting. What came out is the difference in definitions of what setup really means. Right? So I'm glad we had this talk. It is 5 minutes to 2 on my clock. So if nobody has anything else, any other comments, questions, anything to throw out there, then we can wrap it up and I'll get the recording posted as soon as possible. Anyone? Bueller?
I would just say thank you, Seth.
You're welcome.
This is Carrie.
I
did just start the Bulletproof Bookkeeping. So,
I saw that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So a lot of that I already know, but it's some of it's kind of clarified and allowed me the opportunity to explain it a little bit differently to my clients, which is wonderful because I've thought about closing my business for quite some time now. My husband keeps saying, I thought you were retiring. And every time I do that, then somebody calls me on the phone and needing a bookkeeper. So
yep.
And even this is great because I do charge a setup fee. So But like the other gals that talked and chimed in, it was more about setting up the items and, you know, if they've got sales tax issues and all
Yeah,
that
the
kind
actual
of stuff.
QuickBooks company. Yep.
Right. Yep. Yep. So.
Yep, and that makes sense. That makes total sense. And that's actually easy to, by the way, to present the value to the client, because it's like you're setting up their accounting system because they didn't have one. And that's why they called you.
Correct.
So there's definitely value in that.
Right.
No question.
Right. Thank you
Cool.
very much.
Well, it's great to see you, Carrie. I know that I've known you for many, many years. I just remember emailing with you a lot years ago and, you know, answering the questions. And I've always appreciated your presence out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So with that, we'll wrap up. Unless, Greg, you have anything else to share? Go to
I don't think I do. Yeah, go T-Sheets and go introverts. We're all going to unite.
Life is good.
Life is
inside my shell. All right, excellent. We'll see you all. Those of you who are in 97 Up, we'll see you tomorrow for our regularly scheduled programming. And if you're not in 97 Up, just join us because it's a lot of fun and we all learn a lot. So there's that.
Hope to see you guys there.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.